share on the Facebook page the link if you want to see the amendments that we're going to go over. Basically, if you go to the documents section on the J70 class page, it'll be the class changes. There's also right below that is the building spec. So basically, the second and third documents are what we are going to be using. One is really a reference for you if you need to, and we may or may not talk or show the direct thing of the builder spec, other than there's certain things that we've all talked about them. But we'll basically take the class rule changes and we'll just go through them. The basic ones. Some of it's just fixing wording that was either unclear or not technical enough, or it just needed to be changed. And so that's where some of them we'll just kind of breeze through. And then other ones you may have questions. We'll talk about kind of why we decided to do them. And a lot of this comes from the class and from the boat owners saying, hey, I need to cross the boat a little bit faster. Can I cut my tiller? Things like that. So if those that don't know, Polk is the class chair. He has been the class technical chair for about a year-ish and a half, a little more than a year.
Yeah, for 2 years now, I guess. 2 years.
And I guess before that, you were on the committee first?
Yeah, I was the U.S. technical chair for about 2 or 3 years prior to that, and then shifted over to being the international technical chair, which somewhat coincided with the class becoming a world sailing class. So the focus became the international class in terms of the rules. There's still a U.S. technical committee, and those people are also on the international technical committee. But in general, since we're a world sailing class, we are at the international level for most of our rule changes. So as Ed was saying, everything we're going to talk about today is related to the 2020 rules changes, and you can find all of those on the International Class Association website. There's also links to it at the U.S. Class Association website. So the class rules, which have a handy changes document, and then the building specification and the FAQ are the three things that I would point you to for that information. And I guess we're just going to walk through these, right?
Yeah. And so basically what's happened is, as the class has grown, there's some things that were either missed or have come up, and, it's just really staying on top of things. So, people are, paying attention and they know what's going on. This sheet and the form, the way it is now, is actually really good because it talks about it a little more, and it says, look, we made these changes. So some classes is like, yeah, we made a bunch of changes, and then you have to look through the rules and it's hard to find them. And so this basically Polk created a document that says, this is what we changed. Here is what it was. This is what it is. And so it's pretty clear. But I think what we'll talk about is kind of some whys, and, some of that is just, things happen and people come up with things and they suggest them and we make it happen, or we don't make it happen. And so, or we tighten things up so it's a little easier to follow. So Paul, if you want to start, I think the first couple are going to be pretty easy. I have the fourth one that I think is a little more something to talk about. So.
Yeah, so there were 23 changes to the rules this for 2020 that took effect on January 30th. Most of those, the vast majority of those, are not particularly interesting to those of us who sail and own J70s. A lot of this was cleanup and administration and trying to get the rules consistent with the idea of other things out there. So Amendment 1 is one of those, which just deals with how we delegate some of the administrative functions of the class, in particular with respect to the in-house measurement for sails. Amendment 2, we used to call it hull weight, but that really wasn't technically accurate because when we are weighing a J7, we're not simply weighing the hull, we're weighing a bunch of other stuff together with the hull. So because of that, we changed that to be boat weight. and then we define boat weight later on. Amendment 3, you have to put your sticker on the starboard side of the transom. That's just to make it a little bit easier for measurers when we're going to look for stickers. People were sort of putting them all over the transom, or actually all over the hull before. So then we get to some of the ones that are actual substantive changes. Amendment 4 is one that I don't think is a huge change, and it's just more of a loophole close that a lot of our judges were observing, which is it expands the limitations of what you're allowed to grab onto in order to promote rolling during a roll tack or roll jibe, to include the companionway. So you'll sometimes would see people grab the side of the companionway and use it as leverage to try and get an extra roll when they were roll tacking, or jiving. That has been clarified that you can't grab the companionway to do that. You also can't grab the shrouds, masts, stanchions, lifelines, etc., to promote tacking and jibing. Obviously, you can grab these things if you're not promoting tacking and jibing, right? So you can hang on to the boat, holding on to the companionway. It doesn't change any of that. It just changes what you can do in terms of roll tacking. Ed, thought on this?
Yeah, I think with this type of thing, you know, it's also trying to keep the boat so it's not like the most athletic team wins. You know, when you get into those conditions where roll tacking is important, it kind of levels the playing field, and that's a big goal of the class, is to keep things kind of even for everybody. The other thing that we have to do is, you know, we talk to the judges and say, you know, make sure that, you know, if a guy's falling over and he grabs the companionway, that's okay. And so we do have to talk through some of these things. So, you know, we're not, you know, being too, you know, picky. But, you know, the hard part is with the rules is, you know, we write them because we need to. And then the judges, you know, need to enforce them. And so one thing we've talked about, which we haven't done yet, is trying to figure out a system where the judges can give warnings. And unfortunately, that's not there right now. But what we are doing is advising the judges and saying, you know, pay attention to this, you know, stay on top of it, but keep us in the loop that, you know, someone could be falling. If they're doing it every single time, it's different. And so that's kind of where, you know, some of these things come from.
The key language for this amendment is to promote the tacking or jibing maneuver. So we're not intending to stop people from being able to hang onto the boat. It is, as Ed said, just to try to minimize the differences between athletic and less athletic crews.
Okay. A quickie question. When you're in commander's position, are you allowed to lean over the companionway? Like, so if you're sitting right on there and they go for the tag, typically what you do is you would just sort of squish your boat over, maybe, or your body over, and then just sort of like roll your body over the companionway.
Yeah, so I would say that's fine as long as you're not using the companionway edge to get extra leverage in some way, right? I mean, that's the intent of the rule is, you know, we've seen people essentially, you know, stand on the deck, grab the companionway, and then lean back, right, and use it as leverage to promote the maneuver. And that's what we're trying to prevent, because that is a fairly athletic move that we would like to try and keep the playing field as level as possible. So no, I think if you're in the doghouse and you're simply leaning from one side to the other on the deck there, then that is not something that the judges would flag. And as Ed said, you know, all of these rules, particularly the ones with respect to crew positioning, are ones that are constant processes of education with the on-the-water umpires when we have them. And we always have meetings both before and after major events to go through, you know, what the class is looking for, and then after the events, what the umpires have actually seen, so that we can see whether things need to be adjusted. All right, so Amendment 5. Amendment 5 was just fixing some typos and some changes. There's a whole set of world sailing regulations with regard to personal equipment and portable equipment. I won't burden your mind with the difference between personal and portable equipment. We had to clean up some of that to make us consistent throughout. And so you can see at the bottom of Amendment 5, that we clarified there was a typo in what type of PFDs we could allow. And then this idea of personal equipment, which the equipment rules of sailing defines carefully, is now included. Before you could read our class rules, for example, suggest that you weren't allowed to bring lunch on board, which was obviously not something we wanted to do. So we had to make some amendments there. So that is, and we're also specifying that camera equipment is specifically allowed from the class. So if you want to mount a camera on your transom or on your push pit or something, or somewhere else on the boat, it's specifically allowed to do so. Any questions or comments on that one?
So, Polk,
Again, not a big change.
I have a question on it. And we've dealt with this in other classes. I know the answer, but I don't know if World Sailing has addressed this or not. But you know, the different PFDs, being a Coast Guard one and a EU one. If you're sailing in the U.S., can you use an EU one? I know, obviously, you could get pulled over by the Coast Guard and get fined, but is the class worried about that? Are they more concerned of one of these things being covered?
So I think that from a class perspective, we are fine with any of those types of PFDs that are listed in C41A, which are the ISO 124025, level 50, or the Coast Guard Type 3 or some equivalent. You're right, which there's complexity then, because sometimes there's local regulations that overlay that. In most cases, in most jurisdictions, we found out that when you are involved in organized racing activity, the local jurisdictional rules will often defer to whatever the regatta rules are. But people should be careful on their own and be sure that you're complying with whatever the particular rules are. And note that in some venues, the actual sailing instructions will specify that you have to, for example, have Coast Guard approved life jackets, which would mean that those European Union approved life jackets would not work, even though from a class perspective they would. But yes, this is an issue that all classes deal with. Again, we believe from a class perspective that any of those listed in the class rules are okay, but we advise everybody to pay attention to whether or not the local rules or the sailing instructions would have something more specific that you'd be required to carry.
So my side of things there is, you know, use a life jacket you're going to wear, and that's more important. And, you know, it is still up to you to be, you know, compliant to the law. That's up to you. But my side of things is I encourage you to wear a life jacket that you're going to wear. And so if that happens to be an EU one, then wear that one, but then it's up to you on being compliant with the law.
Right. So for me, what I do on my boat is I have down below a pack. I think it's a 4-pack of the orange, you know, Coast Guard approved life jackets, and I just have those stashed below. It can't weigh more than a pound or two, and then we all wear whatever life jacket we want, and bring those on board, and then you don't have to worry about whether you're meeting Coast Guard or not, because you do.
Becky, if a question is relative now, just tell me. Okay. Marlene, do you have a question? Hang on. How do I unmute her?
Nope. I was just asking people to mute their mics.
Okay.
Because it was dominating the screen.
Okay. Yep. Becky is also on top of that with some of that too. So does anyone have any questions about that? That's fairly easy, but also I did want to clarify that, you know, wear what you're going to wear. And like Polk said, that 4-pack of life jackets, if you put them in a Ziploc bag or something and put them down below, they're going to weigh next to nothing, and you can be as safe as possible. So.
All right, Amendment 6 is a change that probably will affect some portion of our fleet, which is everyone has to carry a fire extinguisher. It used to be that the rule specified that only if you had a gas engine did you have to carry a fire extinguisher. It turns out that, in fact, the torpedo engines and batteries in particular, are fairly flammable as well, and so it seemed like it didn't make a ton of sense to have that difference. It also created some differences in terms of what could be weighed with the boat. and what had to be carried on board. So we decided to level the playing field. All boats have a fire extinguisher on board. We don't specify what kind of fire extinguisher. Again, your local regulations may specify what type and size of fire extinguisher you may have to have, and that will vary across the world. And so the class is not really in the business of judging whether your fire extinguisher meets the local regulations or not, but everyone has to carry one. So if you don't have one, if you have a torpedo engine, you may not have carried one routinely. So I'm sure that Ed can recommend a reasonable sized one that would be appropriate for carrying aboard.
Yeah, and on that front, I'm not sure how many people have noticed, but about a year and a half ago, I don't know if you pronounce it kid or kitty, but the KIDDE fire extinguishers, which seem to be most of them, especially the West Marine ones, they got recalled. And so there was a long period of time where it was very difficult to find a small fire extinguisher. We ended up finding one that is small, works easily. It's rated for kind of what we need. Like I said, I'm not a fire extinguisher expert, but I think in a boat situation like ours, where the fires, are not going to be that extreme, they seem to work, and they're fairly reasonable, small, and should cover the case because of that issue that happened for about a year. There were some issues. So, yep.
Okay, onward. Amendment 7 is a non-issue. It just changes from the word boat to word hull to clarify again that we are weighing a boat, not a hull. We also specify a little more clearly what types of things can be included in your weight when you're hanging the boat. And so if you read through that, basically there are you have to remove the sails, any personal equipment, and all the portable equipment except for companionway hatch, the drop board, and the engine. And then if you have some of these approved portable equipment items like a bracket down below for your motor, instruments permanently installed, anything that's permanently installed can be included in your boat weight. So that clarifies that this is the way we'd been actually doing boat weighing for multiple years, but it's just one of those things we had to clarify so that everyone was on the same page with respect to what was included in the boat weight and what was not included in the boat weight.
So batteries and things like that are removable do come out. If it's a motorcycle battery, it's still removable.
Yeah.
It's not, that part of it is not bolted down, even if you've bolted down a box for it.
Exactly. So if you have it in a box down below, the sort of on batteries, the operative question is, are you taking it out of the boat in order to charge it or to replace it? If the answer to that is yes, then it has to come off the boat for weighing. If it stays in the boat, if it cannot be removed from the boat and instead you bring electrical supply down to it in order to charge it, then it's a permanently installed item. So, okay. All right. Onward. We had not been super clear before that you could make holes in the boat to put in speedos and things like that, and obviously you can. So we just clarified that in Amendment 8. Again, shouldn't change anybody's activities. People were doing that before without issue, and should be able to continue to do that. So now we get to Amendment 9, which is one of the ones that I think pretty much everybody is going to have to deal with, and this is the lifelines. The lifeline lashing for the J70 has been a sort of continuous struggle, which is we have found through lots of experience and experimentation that problems with people over hiking almost entirely go away as long as you can keep those lifelines tight enough, which then means that if we enforce tight lifelines, that we don't have a lot of problems with people droop hiking over the lifelines. Now, once we get tighter on the lifelines, another issue that has arisen is that stainless steel tang attached to the stern pulpit turns out to not be particularly strong, and we've seen several cases of those breaking off. which means if you have lashed your lifelines just to that stainless steel tang, that could be a truly unpleasant surprise, and did not seem like a safe condition. So we rewrote this rule on lifeline lashing to try and accomplish a couple of things. One is to be safer by requiring people to pass the lifeline lashing 3 times around the push bit so that you had a really solid attachment point. The other was to use a line that was not likely to slip or creep, so that your lifelines, once you tied them in the morning, for example, would stay basically tight all day or even a whole regatta. One of the issues that we'd been having before is if people were using uncovered Dyneema, almost no matter how hard you try, you couldn't get that to keep from slipping a little bit throughout the day. As pressure got applied to it and released and applied and released, it would eventually slip, and by the end of the day, you'd have super loose lifelines. And so that was a problem. So we changed those 2 things. Ed helped a lot with the drafting of this rule in terms of trying to figure out how we could come up with a rule that allowed lifelines to stay tight and were also safe. And so that's what you get, which is has to go 3 times around the push bit, has to be covered line of at least 3 millimeters diameter, and then you have to tape the lashings when you're done to again prevent the creep.
Yeah, so I think when we're talking about the rule here, you know, and as it was getting put into place, you know, there were some people that were like, you know, is 3 mil really strong enough? Well, that's your discretion as well. You know, your job is not to, you know, your job is to make sure things get tight and get tied. And the class chose the method to do, you know, the going around the whole push pit, because on a big boat, that's what we always did. And if you go on most big boats, you'll notice this is the system that they use, because yeah, this tang is holding up, you know, on a big boat, it's holding up people actually hiking on it. On the J70, what happens is if you get hit back here, this thing can pop off. This weld could be a bad weld with some, you know, rusting from the inside out. And so that's an issue. Really, this becomes a guide to keep it from falling down then. And so we recommended the size probably, you know, really came from the fact that the minimum size of the actual lifeline is 3 mil. And so that's where this is 3 mil. If you don't think that's strong enough, you know, some of these lines that are going to meet the rule are going to have Dyneema inside of it and a cover, and it'll be 3 mil, but it may be low end Dyneema. It may be a smooth cover. I mean, it's still your job to figure out what's going to tighten and work. We chose the dinghy control from Robline because it's more of a square pattern on the cover, so it's grippier, and so that's grippier. So that's really what we recommended. And so some other people have been like, oh, it's got a cover, it's got Dyneema, I like it, you know, and it's not as grippy as what this is. The class can only be so specific in picking brands. You know, they're not going to do that. And so they're going to write the rule with what works. If you think you need Polytech, which is probably going to be grippier, then you use that. If you think 4 mil is going to be better for you, then you should use that. But the class rule is 3 mil minimum, Dyneema core, and a polyester or higher grade cover. And then the 3 lashing or 3 wraps around is a safety thing. And the tape is a safety thing. I've seen plenty of Dyneema used on other boats where when it's brand new, literally the part getting lashed here, you know, it slips all the way out. You know, you used to have to tie a stopper knot on the end. So when you tied your knots, it could slip and stop at that stopper knot. So, you know, these are just, you know, these are still guidelines. You still have to set your boat up for what's going to work. You also need to realize even this, you know, will settle in, you know, a little bit. It still is line. And when you're buying tiny line, you're not going to get like heated SK99 core. So you got to realize that as well. So we're just trying to make it safe and easy for us as well as measurers to be able to look and be like, okay, they have the proper line and it's taped. And it's also protecting you. So if we see that it's taped and you go out sailing and we've checked you and it comes back in and it's loose, well, we still see it's taped. Most likely you didn't take it off on the water. Something could have happened. We had an instance at North Americans in Cleveland where a team got hit. And so they did fall hard against the lifeline, and that did stretch their lashing line. And so, what we saw at that event was, yes, it came out of compliance on one side. The other side was fine. And so they were just then asked to tighten it because, that was an issue. But, it's one of those things that we can trace back that says, yeah, you guys were legal when you left the dock. You had an issue. They shrimped, I think is what happened. They shrimped, they landed on this hard. And so they had issues. So anyways, we're only going to do as much as we can, but we're trying to make it easy for everybody and to make it safe for everybody. So there aren't going to be issues if you do have, have something. The wire is the same reason too. People were going with 3 mil Dyneema, and if you use a cheap 3 mil Dyneema, it's stretching forever. And so the class went to wire so it can not stretch. And so then you can follow the rules a lot easier.
Yeah. So, and then one other point on this is that there is a deflection limitation written into the rule, which is 25 millimeters when a force of 2 kilograms is applied. We have found over and over again in the real world that human beings can typically not lash the lifelines tight enough to meet that rule. And World Sailing would not let me just put in the word taut instead. So we had to have a specific deflection, but just know that basically your rule of thumb is get them as tight as you possibly can, and then that's legal. So pull super hard. And sometimes you may need to use a pair of pliers to get a good grip, depending on how thick your line is. Okay, onward. Hull fittings. We had a little typo in the hull fittings. So Amendment 11 is one that many people have been doing before, but we wanted to make sure it was very clear that it was specifically allowed, which is you can have a bracket that you install down below for your engine. People have done a variety of things below. Ed sells that. I think I have that on my boat. Some people put it on the seat down below on the starboard side. Some people put it forward of the compression post. If you have a torpedo and you just want to put the light part of the torpedo up there. But that is specifically allowed now and can really help keep the motor from crashing around down below.
It weighs less than 3 pounds. So, I mean, it's something that's one of the things that is weighed with the boat then once it's bolted into it.
Right. Yep. So Amendment 12 allows the tiller length to be modified. This is something that the technical committee had been approving on a case-by-case basis for people who thought that they could cross the boat more easily by having a shorter tiller. Some people find that the distance between the main sheet traveler and the tiller is such that it can be difficult for somebody to walk between the two, and instead you end up having to step over. So now we've clearly we've allowed it, so you don't have to request permission to do it. You can just go ahead and shorten your tiller, and we've specified that it's measured from the bolt rather than the end of the tiller. So Ed has a video up, I think, on his Facebook page about how to do that, and I don't know. I think a lot of people may well do that.
Yeah, we have a blog that Sean's gone through all the steps of everything. We've cut off, I don't know, a few of them, and we have a few more that we're working on right now. This is what's inside. There is a G10 piece in there. One of the things you'll run into when you do cut it is, depending on how you cut it, if you cut it in front of where the tiller extension goes on, you're fine. So if you would cut it, here, you'd be fine with that. So you're only cutting off, a small part. But a lot of people, if you're going to cut it, obviously you may want to you actually going to cut it. So here's the length. It's 190 millimeters of what we're seeing anyways, obviously that you can cut off, which is 7.5 inches for us in the US. So what we're doing, and you'll see it on the video, is, we cut it off. This one's cut and then filled. We've put a piece in here of G10. So because the second, if we use the first, so we see this one, we've taken a screw. There's one hole there. we've used the other one because we know it's in this piece of G10, so we know it's solid. And so then what we're doing is we're adding a piece of G10 in that's buried in here to make sure the second one is solid and installed. You could through bolt that, but what we do is we cut them, we reshape them, and we re-gel coat them. And so we make sure, it looks basically like it's the same way it was. So you can see that in our video. We can do that for you. This piece, you can see it's not that big. This is 190 millimeters cut off. So, you're looking at a little more than an inch more could have been taken off. Basically, if we're going to cut it off and you want the max, we're probably going to still be within 5 millimeters. We're not going to go all the way to be exact. But the measurement is from the bolt, the rudder tiller bolt. And you see Sean made this little guide here where you can put a thing in and make your measurement. Kind of hard to do here, but anyways, on the video, there's videos, and we can also go over it if you don't want to do it yourself. But you can see he has the references here with dots, and we're in the range there. So he's got a lot of tools on there that shows you how to do it yourself. We're more than happy to ship it to us, or we've done them at events to shorten them. I think the biggest thing and the biggest need for it is, the bigger the person, the easier it is to get through. The first tillers that were cut were requested, and there were for either health or age issues. And of course, the class said, sure. I think what happened was we saw a few more people just doing it, not asking. And so it just seemed like it was something that a large enough percentage of the fleet wanted to do that. It really becomes a safety issue to not do it if you need to cross the boat cleaner and more smoothly. So it was a no-brainer, but we also didn't want to get out of control, either going too short or maybe people were going to go too long to get their weight forward. So there was nothing in the rule before officially, and so we just looked at the two different manufacturers. They were basically the same, and picked a number that made sense based off of where people were cutting them. We kind of looked at 6 inches and then ended up at 7.5. So, any questions on that from anybody?
All right. Amendment 13 is not a real change in the rule because this is the interpretation that the technical committee had been using for the rule for multiple years. But it does bring into the rule specifically the rules concerning what you can do to the trailing edges of your appendages, right? So the trailing edge of the rudder may be squared off. Note that rudders may not be beveled. You may not have a bevel, meaning one side may not be sanded at an angle. It has to be squared. Yeah, there are handy diagrams in there. And the minimum is 2 millimeters, right? Your minimum is 2 millimeters, which is really thin. I mean, any less than 2 millimeters, and you're probably going to break it pretty easily. So keep that. Use caliper to make sure that you're not going below the 2 millimeters along your edge. You end up a little thinner than 2 millimeters. It's relatively easy to just run some wet sand paper along the trailing edge, square it and get it thicker. On the keel, they may either square it off. So 90 degree angle. Publish diagrams and FAQ document it and show this quite clearly. Or you may bevel it at a 45 degree angle, which would allow you to. Some people like to do that as they believe that it can reduce some of the cavitation that we get on J70s. And there are a number of theories about which direction to bevel it and so forth. But it can't be beveled in 45 degrees. You can't be sanding really deep into the keel that way. It's got to be a nice 45 degree angle there. And then 5 millimeters is the minimum. And again, use caliper as a tool to figure out the 5 millimeters.
So Polk, you went a little bit robotic there. So I don't know if you want to check your connection. So let's just, so let me tell you kind of the history on why this happened. I'll call this the Chris Small keel because he actually started doing this because technically, originally you could do a 45 on the angle, and you ended up with you could end up with a really sharp edge. And at the Worlds in Marblehead, we were looking at a particular boat that we're like, wow, that's really sharp. It was legal. There's nothing wrong with it because it fit the rule of the 45. But what happened is that one side got really sharp, and any little ding or whatever, you're going to chip it off. And so what Chris Small was doing, and I guess, I'm sure other people have, but of course the World's being Marblehead by him, is he was doing this deal where he was leaving that 2 millimeter flat. So what you got from the 45 was still being beneficial, but then you didn't have this basically zero exit point that was very easy to chip off. And, before that, we had told people, just angle it a little bit, just to change the detachment. And then that's when this came up, and it was like, well, it seems to make sense from all aspects of less maintenance on the boat, keeping things even, still getting the benefit of that 45. It just really just kind of made sense. And I think a lot of people have gone that way. So just wanted to basically wanted to make it so people didn't have to spend more money on their keel all the time, really is what it comes down to. So.
Any questions on this one? Okay. So Amendment 14, hopefully my audio is better now. Amendment 14 is the allowance for a main halyard fine tune. One of the most frustrating aspects of J70 is the main halyard continues to slip all the time. And because of that, we were noticing that many people were doing things like installing truckers' hitches and other mechanisms to try and tie off their main halyard to keep it from slipping, all of which are less than optimal from a safety standpoint if you had to get it loose real quick. And so we decided to allow people to do a 2-to-1 purchase system that is anchored to the cleat that's already there. So you're not adding any hardware onto the mast. You're not allowed to use blocks. You can use a hook, just like the one that Ed is showing right there, or you don't have to use a hook. You can just use the tail itself. You can put a loop. It's just like the jib halyard in the sense that there's a loop and a working portion of the halyard and a non-working portion. I personally like the hook on my boat because it's real easy to get on and off real fast. Just hook it in, tighten it down. It does help the slipping quite a lot. I think that's been a pretty good improvement for the boat. And it prevents, and again, the idea is to prevent people from having to use truckers' hitches or other sorts of unsafe mechanisms. This is can be released pretty quickly and maintains a sort of a low stretch attachment for the main halyard.
Yeah, so I think the big thing there, and this is something, Frank McNamara was actually, I think he was technical chair at that point, and he came to me and said, what do we do? What makes sense? This is what we're thinking. And so that's when I wrote, that's this mast, which not everyone probably has 3 feet of mast sitting in their shop. But we, rigged it up, showed how it would work, kept it simple. We have a video on this, and you can do that. Now, remember, it's 2-to-1. And it's also easy for the judges to tell if you're using 2-to-1 or not. We have seen people do something like this, which works, but it's not legal, where they push it up through and, do that. Well, that's 3-to-1 if you count here. So you really don't need 3-to-1, first of all. But that's something that we're seeing a lot of, which is not class legal. I actually, just because of curiosity, I was looking at some photos and just saw a boat, and I'm like, that doesn't look right. And I zoomed in, and I could see from somebody's photo that they're going 3-to-1. So If you think you need 3-to-1 purchase, remember you do not have to pull your main sail through the top of your mast. When we first started making the heated ones that weren't even 2-to-1, actually Judd Smith, when he was sailing with Peter Duncan, told me that when they were at the Europeans in England, where it was blowing like 25 to 30, he said they actually had to ease the halyard. So if you're using a high-tech heated line, this is plenty. You're just trying to get it up snug and keep it snug. And so this system is more than enough. The hook is what we recommend too, because you literally are, good to go. I know I've seen people use shackles as well. That's not class legal, and it's not class legal from the safety standpoint that it's, difficult to take a shackle off if you have to do something quickly. Alan, I know 3-to-1 is much easier. It's just not legal. So, it's fine that, that other option is there. If down the line, that's something that people want to petition the class to do, they can. It's just no other reason that it's not legal. The class chose to go 2-to-1 because people wanted to have, something better than what they had. And this has worked. If down the line, everyone thinks, 3-to-1 is something they want to look for in that other option, which does work, that's fine. But, you just got to ask the class, the technical committee will go over it. And then unfortunately, with the way the class is right now, we just have to ask, ISAF and put it in. So it's just not a simple, yeah, we can do that. Now it's at the state where it's like, okay, we want to change it. It's a change. If you do want that, I would just recommend proposing that. And it's not too big of an issue, but
yeah, as with all of these rules changes, there's no magic to them other than, we're trying to balance a number of criteria in terms of making it safe, making it easy, making it relatively inexpensive. And so if people have ideas, thoughts, and comments, by all means, let us know, and we can, work those through the process. As Ed said, it's a fairly cumbersome process at this point, but, we sort of batch these changes together and try and do them once every year or two, so that we're not sort of constantly hassling with world sailing. But these are things that can be continually reconsidered. Right. Okay. So Amendment 15. So Amendment 15 has caused some confusion among some people. This is the idea that in some cases, if you get written permission, and again, remember that's an important piece of this, you can shim the outside of the keel wedges, either to make them wider or to, in some cases, make them narrower. For most people who have a U.S. built boat, this is not really an issue, because the U.S. built boats, the keel wedges actually fit pretty snugly into the slots in the trunk. For some U.S. boats, for reasons that are not entirely clear to me, the mold is slightly different, and those keel wedge slots are wider. They're actually not deeper fore and aft; they're just wider, port and starboard. And because of that, if you look at those, sometimes they look like the keel has a lot of room to slot back and forth. According to the designers and engineers at J-Boats, that is not in fact the case, because in both cases, what's holding the keel in place are the fore and aft wedge components. But some people, particularly in Europe, have wanted the ability to make sure that they fill in that extra space that can be there in the trunk. So it's not going to change. It's not to be used. It's not intended, nor would it actually change the way that your keel angles in the boat. It wouldn't change anything about how deep the keel goes down. It's merely, I don't want to say merely cosmetic, because there's aspects of it that look more than cosmetic, but it's not something that's going to change the characteristics of the boat. Now, if you think that you have a boat where there's an unusually large amount of gap between the keel wedges and the outside, meaning port and starboard parts of the keel trunk, let us know. Send me pictures. The technical committee can approve a repair to allow you to either thin down your wedges or in some cases shim them out. It's almost always shimming out. It's relatively rare to have to cut them down. So that's that component. That is not one where people should expect that you can just go ahead and do that on your own. First of all, that's not legal. Second of all, it wouldn't do anything for you. It would just waste your time and money.
So if you get approval from this, basically, measure where your keel goes down to, and try to match that as well, because that is a specific measurement. What is going on with some of the older boats is you're getting some cracks. They may be cosmetic. We haven't seen any fail yet, but they aren't looking very good because the boats are older, and some of the ones that are left up in the past with the UV showing on them, they're going to look like they're deteriorating. So from a safety factor, obviously replace them. If you're replacing them, make sure, if you're talking to us, give us your sale number if we don't know it. They changed the process a little bit to make it easier in the build. And so basically the first boats, if you've taken yours off, there may have been spacers actually on the inside, and those we're shimming them out to fit. So let us know, or let whoever's getting them for you know your hull number. So they do know which ones the factory does. I've never really actually asked them which ones, but the factory does know which ones need which set, and so they will send you the right ones. But sometimes it will be, a technical job to get back to zero. We have had people throw a new set in, and the keel, is like 3/4 of an inch up. Obviously a problem. If you are doing any changing, you can. There is a spec for how you can adjust these to get them to fit, so that you will be legal. But it starts off with requesting to change them.
Yeah, and I would echo Ed's comment that the keel wedges themselves, the Delrin wedges, are wear items. They do wear out. They don't last forever. I would say 8 times out of 10 when we find a boat at the Worlds or elsewhere that's non-compliant with our keel down measurement, which by the way has only a 10 millimeter tolerance, so it's very, very tight tolerance there. 80-90% of the time, the reason that's happened is because their keel wedges have started to crumble, especially at the bottom, and because of that, the keel keeps settling down a little more, and that's obviously a safety issue and something you'd want to replace. So, okay, onward. On the Amendment 16 deals with the upper backstay. The upper backstay can be any length, but it does have to incorporate the ring or the ferrule that's in there. The stock one is 23 millimeters. And so that sort of, because you have a windage, that might limit how short you want to go. Some people go shorter on their upper backstay because it gives you a little more adjustment capability, because then obviously you have longer legs and can then pull more control line. So that is a change that people are doing to make their upper backstay a little shorter.
In general, from our side of things, and so we haven't actually done an actual measurement, but all our masts have gone back and back and back and back from the tuning guides, and so you're adding forestay length. Adding an inch forward, I don't know how much that is at the top, but obviously it's a fair amount. And so staying with the stock, which is basically 25 feet long for that upper part, you just ran out of room for that V section to make it work. Shortening a foot actually does a lot, because it's, an extra 2 feet here. So remember that if you are going to change it, you kind of almost have to change a lot of things. Your control line might be okay. Your bridle was most likely needs to be changed. If you go more extreme than the 1 foot, then you're probably gonna have to change everything, and that's that's okay. That's a preference. The most we've probably done is 3 feet shorter. On average, most of them are a foot shorter. but that's someone obviously who probably is going to sail in big breeze more often to have the more leverage they need. We did the ferrule thing because they came with a ferrule. They come with a very large ferrule, and so we ended up. I basically measured a couple ferrules I thought were appropriate, that were fairly small, but not too small, and we came up with a 23 millimeter number. If you take a Harken 10, a Tylaska FR6, they're basically the smallest ones, and they're plenty small and appropriate for what we're needing it for. So it's a pretty important thing for making your backstay work well.
Okay. Any questions about that? All right. So Amendment 17 deals with some of the diameters of the running rigging. We won't go through that in any detail. We just clarified a lot of different things. There were some parts of the running rigging, like the outhaul, that weren't even specified before. And so what we've done is just gone through and tried to update that where it seems sensible. No significant changes there that I think are going to cause anybody to have to do anything different than what they're already doing. And remember that these are minimum diameters in some cases, and in fact, in many cases, it may well be that that you would prefer somewhat larger. I know a lot of people go a little bigger, particularly on their spin sheets, just because it's easier on the hand.
So one thing to think about also is these are minimum overall. So if you're tapering, a spin sheet is 6 mil, but if most people use 8 mil, and it tapers to 6 mil. So when you go with the light air spin sheets, they're 6 mil and they're not tapered because they need to be 6 mil. Some things have changed, like the working tail for the main halyard is 4 mil because it's just a tail. So that it's not going to make a difference, but it actually will save you a little bit of money because it's now 4 mil. But like Polk said, there were a few things that just weren't there, and I think some of the things weren't there because the spar manufacturer sent the outhaul with the outhaul. So that was all the specs we have from the beginning were from the rope manufacturer, not from the spar manufacturer, and so they were just left off. No real thing there other than they just happened to be left off. Actually, do we even have the furler line on here? Is there a furler line spec? That might be the only other one changed because that comes from Harken. We should add that if we do, but that's 4 mil. It's plenty small. We make a 6 mil one taper to 4 mil. So around the drum is the same. No one's going to go any smaller. So it's just making sure all these things were covered. And I think that's where it's, sometimes people don't realize that there's a lot of things that, people, are volunteering to do to get, make sure these things are all, correct. So. Okay, good. So Amendment 18 is the one about spars. I realize that that we're flipped on this one in terms of what's old and what's new. What's labeled old is actually the new one. The bottom line here is that you can now swap spars now that we have 2 spar manufacturers. Well, we actually have 1 right now, but we've had 2 for the class. You can do so once every 12 months unless you break your spar or there's some reason that you have to switch. So, for that you need approval from the technical committee. But otherwise, you can switch your Southern spar with a Selden if you want. Once every 12 months, you have to leave it on for 12 months. It requires a reissue of your manufacturer's declaration so that we can track that. There's a mast step now that Selden can provide that's basically a bolt for bolt replacement with what the Southern mast step is. So you don't have to do any glass work or any drilling of holes in order to make this swap. So I think some people are doing that. Again, it's sort of a matter of preference about which spar you like, but that is a possibility now. So one thing to think about with this also, obviously the easiest is to take the Selden new mast step and put that on because it's a hold the whole match. Previously, when it was allowed, there wasn't the exact same. You had to drill new holes and the whole deal, and it was different. There is a measurement if you want to check, that yours is in the right spot from the bow of the boat. And there's the class did a really good job of making sure that was set. Because if you have a French boat and you would want to go to a Southern, if that's even possible, you wouldn't have the quick switch over. But we have all the tools and everything to make sure that if you are going to make a change, we can make sure you can be it can be done properly. I have a question here real quick from Jim. You can switch, only use that spar for 12 months. Can you pick and choose from event to event? No. So you can pick from everybody. Yeah, you can switch after 12 months. Polk, is there anything that people are worried about, or that the class is going to be like, no, I don't think you should switch? Is it just as long as your 12 months is up, the class, has there been specific discussion like 12 months is up, I want to switch? I come to the class and say, I want to switch. Is there any reason to say, no, you can't?
No, in fact, we don't, this is because of the way it's written, the rule, this is a permissive rule. You can go ahead and switch, and you basically just have to tell us that you switched. And note, we are now tracking whenever we are measuring a boat, we're writing down the serial number of the spar. And so now we're tracking that with the boat. And so if you showed up somewhere someday with a spar number that was not the one that was on your manufacturer's declaration, then obviously that would be a disqualifier. So what you need to do is make sure that we know at the class which spar you're using, and you can't tell us that you're updating your spar except for more than once a year. And so to Jim's question, no, the intent is definitely not that people sort of go regatta to regatta with the two spars and pick the one that they think is going to be better for that regatta. The intent is that if people really want to switch spars, they can go ahead and do that. And we're hoping that most people aren't going to be swapping spars back and forth, that this is more like a one-time change. But because it might be that some people want to switch back, we offer that option after 12 months.
So, and what's going on by spars? It's actually the spar package. So the mast and the boom right now, spreaders cannot be switched from one to the next because one set's aluminum, one set's carbon. There's never going to be need for that. There may end up being some different changes in the future because with the Southern not building spars, if you end up breaking a boom, you may need to petition, hey, can I put a Selden boom on a Southern spar? We just need to take those as they would come. And so just, there might be another spar builder. I know, there is a worry because we already lost Southern, which was, we thought the biggest, one that we would have. So, there is, from the manufacturers looking to see if there's an option to build another spar, but nothing that is no urgency. But if you look at some of the previous classes, especially J-boat classes, there have been multiple spar builders. But right now, if you have an issue with a Southern spar, you're going to have to buy a Selden spar. We have confirmed that the rigging works from mast to mast, so you wouldn't have to buy new wire. Of course, if you had a fatal issue, you would probably buy new wire. But if you just were switching, you don't have to switch. I say that, but actually the uppers on the Selden.
I think the uppers on the Selden are slightly different, right?
The uppers, well, the length would be the same.
It's the attachment, right?
You don't have the little balls,
right?
Stoppers to keep them in place on the Southerns or on the Selden. So that doesn't mean it wouldn't work still with the slot there, but that's probably the only difference in the wire is the little stopper pieces to keep the spreaders in place. But yeah, there's no, and it's one of those things where, people are going to, take what they have. There really isn't a lot of people buying Seldens because now you can put it on your boat. There's been a couple, and actually there's one team that bought a Selden and they're staying with their Southern. So it's really a non-issue. But it is something that now is available if you'd want to.
Okay.
question.
Questions about that? If not, moving on. So Amendment 19 is a non-issue. We just had to change our definition of batten pocket length to match up with equipment rules of sailing. Amendment 20 specifies where the royalty label goes on the sails. Not a big deal for anybody here. We changed slightly in consultation with the sailmakers a little bit about how we are measuring around the clew of the head sail in terms of the way that the ring or the kringle is put in the sail. Again, not something that is probably of widespread interest. So Amendment 22 and 23 are sort of our last substantive ones. And that is we changed the rule on outside assistance a little bit. It's now called outside help to match up with the racing rules of sailing, and we clarified that towing is a form of outside help that is not allowed. So you can't be towed back to the dock, from the dock, etc. If this provision of the rules is activated. Note that this section of the rules is in section I, which is an area of the rules where it has to be specifically noted by the notice of race or sailing instructions to be in effect. So this is not an always-on rule. It's an optional rule that the organizing authority can turn on. I would say that 90% of the organizing authorities do turn this on because it's fairly popular to have no outside help, levels playing field, diminishes the cost, etc. And so we're specifying that towing is part of that as well. And then the final amendment is we now have an optional 1 Pro division. Many class members have given us feedback that they would like to sail in a 1 Pro configuration, and they think that long term may be a way that the class would continue to grow. And so as a way of allowing different organizing authorities to promote that configuration, we've allowed a 1 Pro division. Just like the Corinthian division, it's something that's optional. You basically would score people on the 1 Pro division and give out awards if you wanted to for your regatta. Again, there also is a provision in the rules allowing an organizing authority to have an entire regatta that's limited to 1 Pro per boat. That was tried at the Midwinters a few years ago to some mixed reviews, and I think it hasn't really been picked up again. It may be there seems to be some interest in doing a little more of that, particularly in Europe. So we'll see if we see more of that. But the 1 Pro division is an option.
I think that's something we may want to pay attention to a little bit now in the current situation. When we come back to sailing, it might be something that becomes more important, keeping budgets lower and that type of thing. There was a fair amount of noise when they did it for the Midwinters, but it didn't show up when the people showed up to the regatta. And so it was interesting to see that happen at a major regatta. But the reality was we've been getting 50 to 55 boats at every Midwinters. That boat was no different, or that event was no different. And I don't think it was a negative thing, but I think it's something that everyone needs to think about because, the class has to keep growing. So this is a tool that's been put into place to test to see if that's something that will help the class keep growing. It may or may not. We'll see. But those are things.
The Worlds in LA, we're planning to offer a 1 Pro division. They probably will when we do that in 2021 now. So just sort of for your
third division
and planning, I think that they will be offering a 1 Pro division, and I would be surprised if that didn't start to spread even further than that.
Yeah, no, that's actually, I didn't realize that. That's great because, the side of things that we work with, and we work with a lot of owners directly is, there's a lot of people that just don't want to go sailing without their guy. They can go sailing without their 3 guys, but there's a lot of them that they're like, they have their guy, they're busy working and being successful, and they have someone that just runs their program, and sometimes it's a pretty good pro, but sometimes it's just a good pro, and a guy that, moves the boat, sets it up, is there for them at all times so they can show up and just go sailing, because that's the important thing. The important thing is, we want to make it easier for people to just show up and go sailing. So if we need to allow one pro and this type of thing, I think it's a very good thing. I bet if we, Polk, has anyone done a survey at these events to see how many boats have, had just one pro?
Yeah, so we've done a couple of, after a regatta, we can go through yacht scoring and basically figure that out. And it seems like 20% or more in some regattas have a single pro and no more on board. So that's what leads us to believe that this may become a increasingly popular thing for organizing authorities to do. So, those of you out there who like this idea, what I would say is tell the regatta organizers that this is a way that you want to sail, and make sure that they include this one pro division in their scoring, and we'll see how it goes. If it turns out that instead of 25% we're getting 60%, 70% people doing one pro, then maybe it's time to think about going to a group 3 limit on crew. So we'll see. Nothing's been decided along that line, but as Ed says, we're going to have to make some decisions when we come back to sailing here about what the future of the class looks like.
Yeah, and I do think that when I've looked at the pros, like say the Worlds, you have a lot of teams that you're like, they've always been Corinthian, but now they have one guy. And sometimes that one guy is pretty beneficial. And you're spending a lot of money to go to a world championship. You really want to make sure everything's perfect. And so I think that's a pretty smart thing. I see one pro just got on here in Jay with, his team sails with one pro. I mean, and that's what works for them. And I think that's a team that's been together for a long time that, that's a good example of when one pro works. And so I think that's a smart thing to pay attention to and to promote. Maybe we'll do one soon. I would like to see some events do that. I've always thought that there should be a 2-pro maximum, but there isn't, So, that was something I always thought could be a good thing is, the open fleet is a maximum of 2 pros. It's just, these are good things that we've gone over. I think it covers a lot of the different areas of the class. It's not covering just the boat. I think a lot of time was put into it for sure by everybody in the technical committee, especially Polk. And I think we need to thank him a lot for his service because it's a hard job. And luckily he's technical on the wording side as a lawyer, and he can write things so they both make sense and can be solid. And I think we definitely want to realize how important that is to the J70 class to have good people behind it. And I know Chris Howell as our executive director, works really close, but his job isn't to do it. His job is to do what the class wants him to do, and then he relies on people like Polk, and then Polk relies on people on the committees he sets up and the board and everything. And so as owners, definitely, if there's something you're interested in changing, even if it's small, you just got to put it out there and it'll go to the right people. And it's kind of one of those things, if it makes sense, it'll go farther. But we also need to realize that some of the things, even like, simple things, it still has to get approved from ISAF. So it's not like the class can even make the final decision. So remember that also when you're talking to people that are volunteers that are, policing these things and getting these things written up, that yes, the class can vote 100% for something, but if they don't write it correctly or ISAF can just say no. So we need people like Polk to write it correctly so things can get changed and we can keep the class growing. So feel free to reach out.
I see Marlene has suggested a new rule allowing divers to clean between races. So, I think not that there's any self-interest in that one.
Yeah, not at all. I'm fine with that. You just can't stop the boat.
Right. So, let me just give a final pitch to everybody on the call. which is, as Ed said, the rules are only as good as we make them. These are our rules by and large. And so if you have changes you'd like to see, if you think there are things that we're doing wrong with respect to the rules or the administration of the class, then by all means, send me an email, talk to me on the dock at the next regatta. I can only make the changes that I hear about and that we can vet through the technical committee. And we have a really good group, including Ed and others who are interested and really good at thinking through some of these issues. It takes a while to get them through World Sailing, but we can do that. Having done this the last time around, I have a pretty good relationship with World Sailing now. So, but it's the type of thing where we can't change rules every month. We've got to sort of think about this in 1 year cycles. So, if there are rule changes you'd like to see for 2021, let me know. We can certainly consider that. So.
I think one thing to think about when you are going to suggest a rule change is think about the safety side of things. And if you can come at it from a safety side of things, it's really going to have a lot more meat to it. And so, if it just is something that's, a preference or whatever, it's going to be harder. But there's plenty of things that we have changed as a class that make sense. And that's the important thing. So. But thanks, everybody, and feel free.
Thanks, everybody. Stay safe, stay healthy.
Yep.
See you sailing soon, hopefully.
Hopefully. Thanks, everyone.